Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, June 16th, 2022. Former President Donald Trump's intense, sustained pressure on former Vice President Mike Pence to not certify Joe Biden's presidential election victory on January 6, 2021, despite Pence's not believing he had the power to do that, and the resulting anger by the rioters that stormed the U.S. Capitol that day, directed at Mike Pence with chance to hang him. The focus today of the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, where portions of that testimony just ahead. President Joe Biden signing into law an ocean shipping reform bill as an anti-inflation measure. He says the changes will help bring down high costs being charged by shipping companies. Bipartisan vote in the Senate to pass a bill to provide veterans exposed to toxic substances from burn pits with health care and other benefits. And an update from federal health officials on when the COVID-19 vaccines for the youngest children, those under 5 years old, will be authorized. From the Associated Press, Donald Trump's closest advisors viewed his last-ditch efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to reject the tally of state electors and overturn the 2020 election as nuts, crazy, and even likely to incite riots, witnesses revealed in stark testimony to the January 6th committee on Thursday. Gripping new evidence also detailed how the mob that stormed the Capitol that day came within 40 feet of where Pence and his team were sheltering, highlighting the danger Trump had put him in. With live testimony, including from Pence's counsel and other evidence from its year-long investigation, the panel is dissecting as unlawful and unconstitutional the plan from conservative lawyer John Eastman to reverse Joe Biden's election victory. The pressure Trump put on Pence, including at a January 6th rally, led directly to the insurrection at the Capitol. That's how the Associated Press put today's hearing, covered live on the C-SPAN networks. Here's a portion, a focus on the early days of the pressure campaign. You'll hear from Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, member of the committee, Greg Jacob, former counsel to Vice President Mike Pence, and also video of former President Trump, of Mark Short, former chief of staff to Mike Pence, former Trump aides Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, and Jason Miller.
Fortunately for the fate of our republic, Vice President Pence refused to go along with President Trump's demands that he determine the outcome of the presidential election. Mr. Jacob, what was the Vice President's reaction when you discussed with him the theory that the Vice President could decide the outcome of the election?
Congressman, as I've testified, the Vice President's first instinct was that there was no way that any one person, particularly the Vice President, who is on the ticket and has a vested outcome in the election, could possibly have the authority to decide it by rejecting electors or to decisively alter the outcome by suspending the joint session for the first time in history in order to try to get a different outcome from state legislatures.
Despite the fact that the Vice President had a strongly held and correct view that he could not decide the outcome of the election, President Trump launched a multi-week campaign of both public and private pressure to get the Vice President Mike Pence to violate the Constitution. Here are some examples of the intense pressure the Vice President faced from all sides and what his Chief of Staff thought of it.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you. I hope that our great Vice President comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
Was it your impression that the Vice President had directly conveyed his position on these issues to the President, not just to the world through a Dear Colleague letter, but directly to President Trump?
Many times.
And had been consistent in conveying his position to the President?
Very consistent.
I am aware of the fact that the President was upset with the way Pence acted. Are we to assume that this is going to be a climactic battle?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the courage and the spine of the individuals involved.
That would be a nice way to say a guy named Vice President Mike Pence?
Yes.
I think we've been clear as to what the Vice President's role was. I think the Vice President been clear with the President, and I think I've been clear with Mark Meadows.
I think the vice president is going to throw down tomorrow and do the right thing because, Lou, like I said before, this is a time for choosing. People are going to look back at this moment tomorrow and remember where every single one of their elected officials were. Did they vote for the rule of law and getting these elections right, or did they give it away to the Democrats and the people who cheated and stole their way through this election?
Definitely in the, when I got back into town, as talk say like the 5th and the 6th, the president was, all the attention was on what Mike would do or what Mike wouldn't do.
The vice president really was not wavering in his commitment to what his responsibility was. And so, yeah, was it painful? Sure.
The president's pressure campaign started in December. For example, although the vice president made his views clearly and unmistakably known to the president and others in the White House, on December 23rd, President Trump retweeted a memo from an individual named Ivan Reichland entitled Operation Pence Card that called on the vice president to refuse the Electoral College votes from certain states that had certified Joe Biden as the winner. President Trump started his pressure campaign in December, but he dialed up the pressure as January 6th approached.
It's Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. You also heard in-person testimony from Greg Jacob, former counsel to Vice President Mike Pence, and also some video testimony from, among others, Mark Short, former chief of staff to Mike Pence, and Jason Miller, former aide to President Trump, also Rudy Giuliani and Steve Bannon, who were advising President Trump as well. More from the hearing and what happened the morning of January 6, 2021, in the immediate lead-up to the accounting of the electoral votes, former President Trump calling on the phone former Vice President Mike Pence. You're going to hear video testimony from Eric Hirschman, former White House lawyer, Ivanka Trump, daughter to the president and also White House advisor, Nicholas Luna, former assistant to President Trump, General Keith Kellogg, former advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, and Julie Radford, a former aide to Ivanka Trump. And at the end, what some of the rioters that day said on video.
When I got in, somebody called me and said that the family and others were in the Oval, and do I want to come up? So I went upstairs.
And who do you recall being in the Oval Office?
Don Jr., Eric, Laura, Kimberly, I believe Meadows was there. At some point, Ivanka came in.
It wasn't a specific, formal discussion. It was very sort of loose and casual.
So then you said at some point there's a telephone conversation between the president and the vice president. Is that correct?
Yes.
When I entered the office the second time, he was on the telephone with who I later found out to be was the vice president.
Could you hear the vice president or only hear the president's end?
Only hear the president's end. But at some point it started off as a calmer tone and everything, and then became heated.
The conversation was pretty heated.
I think till it became somewhat, louder tone. I don't think anyone was paying attention to it initially.
Did you hear any part of the phone call, even if just the end that the president was speaking from?
I did, yes.
All right, and what did you hear?
So as I was dropping off the note, I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, you are a wimp, you'll be a wimp. Wimp is the word I remember.
It's also been reported that the president said to the vice president that something to the effect of, you don't have the courage to make a hard decision.
Worse, I don't remember exactly either, but something like that, yeah. You're not tough enough to make the call.
It was a different tone than I'd heard him take with the vice president before.
Did Ms. Trump share with you any more details about what had happened, or any details about what had happened in the Oval Office that morning?
That her dad had just had an upsetting conversation with the vice president.
Do you recall anything about her demeanor, either during the meeting or when you encountered her in Dan Scavino's office?
I don't remember specifically. I mean, I think she was uncomfortable over the fact that there was obviously that type of interaction between the two of them.
Something to the effect, the wording's wrong. I made the wrong decision 4 or 5 years ago.
And the word that she relayed to that the president called the vice president, I apologize for being impolite, but do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word.
Mr. Jacob, how would you describe the demeanor of the vice president following that call with the president?
When he came back into the room, I'd say that he was steely, determined, grim.
Of course, the most dangerous part of what Donald Trump did on January 6th was what he did himself. As will be discussed in detail in a future hearing, our investigation found that early drafts of the January 6th ellipse speech prepared for the president included no mention of the vice president. But the president revised it to include criticism of the vice president and then further ad-libbed. Here is what the president said on January 6th after his call with Vice President Pence.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. And I just spoke to Mike. I said, Mike, that doesn't take courage. What takes courage is to do nothing. That takes courage. And then we're stuck with a president who lost the election by a lot, and we have to live with that for 4 more years. We're just not going to let that happen. And Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. And they want to recertify their votes. They want to recertify. But the only way that can happen is if Mike Pence agrees to send it back. So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to.
Of course, we all know what happened next. The president's words had an effect. President Trump's supporters became angry. When the vice president issued his public letter, the crowd at the Capitol erupted in anger. The rioters who had erected makeshift gallows began chanting, "Hang Mike Pence."
Congressman Pete Aguilar.
Our investigation has made clear what the target of the rioters' ire was: Vice President Mike Pence. The rioters breached the Capitol at 2:13 p.m. Now let's take a look at what was going on at the White House at this time. We received testimony that the President's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, was notified of the violence at the Capitol by 2 p.m., and likely earlier. The testimony further establishes that Mr. Meadows quickly informed the President, and that he did so before the President issued his 2:24 p.m. tweet criticizing Vice President Pence for not having, quote, courage to do what needed to be done. Here is what the President wrote in his 2:24 p.m. tweet while the violence at the Capitol was going on. And here is what the rioters thought.
Nothing but a traitor, and he deserves to burn with the rest of them.
So this all escalated after Pence. What happened to Pence? Pence didn't do what we wanted.
Pence voted against Trump.
Okay, and that's when all this started?
Yep. That's when we marched on the Capitol. We've been shot at with rubber bullets, tear gas.
We just heard that Mike Pence is not going to reject any fraudulent electoral votes. That's right. You heard it here first. Mike Pence has betrayed the United States of America. Mike Pence has betrayed this president, and he has betrayed the people of the United States.
betrayed us, which apparently everybody knew he was going to, and the president mentioned it like 5 times when he talked. You can go back and watch the president's video.
This is our capital. Let's be respectful to him. There's 4 million people coming in, so there's a lot of control. We love you guys. We love the cops.
It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming.
The video played today at the House Select Committee on the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. At the end, video of some of the rioters that day, January 6, 2021. Before that, you heard recorded depositions with some people who came in over the past year to talk with the committee, including Ivanka Trump, daughter to the former president and also White House advisor, and Eric Hirschman, a former White House lawyer, General Keith Kellogg, former advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence, Julie Radford, former aide to Ivanka Trump, and in the room, in person, testifying, Greg Jacob, former counsel to former Vice President Mike Pence. John Eastman, the lawyer who drafted the memo and the theory that then Vice President Mike Pence could determine which electoral votes to count and not count, did appear before the committee over the year, recorded testimony, and there was some video played today in which he repeatedly refused to answer questions, pleading the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A second in-person witness at today's hearing was retired U.S. Federal Appeals Court Judge Michael Ludig. Here he is asked by Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, vice chair of the committee, what could have happened had John Eastman's plan been put into effect.
You say, had the Vice President of the United States obeyed the President of the United States, America would immediately have been plunged into what would have been tantamount to a revolution within a paralyzing constitutional crisis. Could you elaborate on that for us, Judge?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. That passage in my statement this morning referenced the most foundational concept in America, which is the rule of law. Thus, as I interpret your question, you are asking about that foundational truth of these United States, which we call America. The foundational truth is the rule of law. That foundational truth is, for the United States of America, the profound truth. But it's not merely the profound truth for the United States. It's also the simple truth, the simple foundational truth of the American Republic. Thus, in my view, the hearings being conducted by this select committee are examining that profound truth, namely the rule of law in the United States of America. The specific question, of course, before you and before the nation, not before me, is whether that foundational rule of law was supremely violated on January 6, 2021, Now, to the question specifically that you asked, Madam Vice Chair, I believe that had Vice President Pence obeyed the orders from his president and the President of the United States of America during the joint session of the Congress of the United States on January 6, 2021, and declared Donald Trump the next President of the United States, notwithstanding that then President Trump had lost the Electoral College vote as well as the popular vote in the 2020 presidential election. That declaration of Donald Trump as the next president would have plunged America into what I believe would have been tantamount to a revolution within a constitutional crisis in America, which in my view, and I'm only one man, would have been the first constitutional crisis since the founding of the Republic.
Michael Ludick is a retired U.S. Federal Appeals Court judge appointed by Republican presidents and was an informal advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence in the run-up to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, testifying today before the House Select Committee investigating that attack. Questioned by Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, the committee vice chair. Today was hearing number 3 for the Select Committee. There are several more to come. They'll all be live on C-SPAN radio and television. You can watch on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app or listen on your smart speaker. Say, play C-SPAN radio. 2 scheduled for next week, Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, and Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Earlier today, the Select Committee Chair, Benny Thompson, Democrat from Mississippi, telling reporters the committee will invite Virginia Ginny Thomas, an activist and the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, at some point to give testimony. This after there have been media reports that Ginny Thomas exchanged emails with conservative lawyer John Eastman, who wrote the memo suggesting that Vice President Mike Pence did not have to certify the 2020 presidential election for Joe Biden. Ginny Thomas telling the Daily Caller, "I can't wait to clear up misconceptions. I look forward to talking with them." This is Washington Today. From Bloomberg News, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said she's confident the U.S. Supreme Court will eventually regain the public's confidence, offering an optimistic message to a liberal audience, even as the court considers eliminating the constitutional right to abortion and expanding gun rights. That's how Bloomberg put it. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor was interviewed today by one of her former law clerks, Tiffany Wright, who's now a White House Associate Counsel, at the annual conference of the American Constitution Society in Washington.
Until recently, the judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court, had enjoyed relatively steady confidence from the public. And Gallup is now reporting that for the first time since they started polling on the issue, public confidence in the court has plummeted and is at its lowest point. So why should the public continue to have confidence in its institutions of government, including the Supreme Court?
Institutions are made up by human beings. Because we are human, by necessity, we make mistakes. It is the nature of the human enterprise that people, as judges, as politicians, as presidents, as whatever, that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have errors of judgment. What you believe in is an institutional structure, our government, how it operates together, the three branches of government, the checks and balances in the way they operate, and in the people who created us. You are as equal, if not the fourth branch of government, and perhaps the most important because you vote. And you are the ones who elect, or at least indirectly appoint, the other branches. And to that end, when we as institutions have made mistakes, other parts of the branches, because the four work in tandem. Remember, I created the people as the fourth now. The people have worked to make changes.
Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, program today hosted by the American Constitution Society in Washington, D.C. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The January 6th committee enters day 4 of public hearings as they continue disclosing evidence gathered in their investigation. Watch the hearing live Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3, C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or anytime online at cspan.org. You can also visit our website, cspan.org/January 6, to watch previous hearings and other videos related to that day. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Joe Biden signing into law today the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022. It's designed to address high prices and what the president sees as unfair practices, freeing up clogged supply chains and putting a dent in inflation. The bill requires the Federal Maritime Commission to investigate complaints about late fees charged by ocean carriers and terminals, and also bars them from unreasonably refusing cargo space for U.S. shipments. President speaking at the White House before signing the bill.
A few months ago, my State of the Union address, part of my plan to lower costs for Americans, I promised to crack down on ocean carriers whose price hikes have hurt American families and American businesses. And today I'm proud to say that we've got that done on a bipartisan basis, and you did it quickly, folks. In just a few minutes, I'm going to be signing the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 to put a stop to shipping companies taking advantage of American families, farmers, ranchers, and businesses, and to bring down prices and give the American people a little bit of breathing room, just a little bit more breathing room. You want to know why prices are so high? Well, there are a number of reasons having to do with Putin's war in Ukraine, disruption caused by the pandemic. But one of the factors affecting prices is this: 9 major shipping companies consolidated into 3 alliances control the vast majority of ocean shipping in the world. And each of these 9 is foreign-owned. During the pandemic, these carriers increased their prices by as much as 1,000%. 1,000%. While families and businesses struggled around the world, these carriers made $190 billion in profit in 2021, 7 times higher than the year before. 7 times higher than the year before. And they raked in the profits. And the cost got passed on, as you might guess, directly to the consumers, sticking it to American families and businesses because they could. Furniture, appliances, clothing, anything and everything that crossed the Pacific on a ship from Asia saw a price tag shoot up. And families and businesses felt the squeeze here at home. In addition, these foreign-owned carriers have also been refusing to carry American-made products back to Asia. That's the interesting part. That's where Zippy comes in, there's the Farm Bureau and others. It hurts the entire economy, but it especially hurts our farmers who depend on ocean shipping to sell their products to customers overseas.
President Biden at the White House before signing this ocean shipping reform bill, a bill that passed the House and Senate recently with overwhelming votes. From Bloomberg News, floods stopped infant formula production at an Abbott Laboratories facility less than 2 weeks after the major supplier got back up and running following contamination concerns. But the U.S. Food and Drug Administration said there will be enough of the product for babies to meet demand. The FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, testifying today before a Senate committee. It was mostly about COVID-19 response, but he was asked to give a status report on the infant formula shortage.
We have twice daily intensive calls about all the work streams working on the infant formula issue, and at the end of the call yesterday, I commented it was one of the first days that we hadn't had any surprises. 20 minutes later, the email came across about the flood in Sturgis, which has forced that facility to temporarily shut down. This is an unfortunate setback and a reminder that natural weather events can cause unforeseen disruptions in supply chains. I had a call with the CEO last night. He's sharing our desire to get the facility up and running again as quickly as possible. Abbott is working to assess the damage today, and we'll be talking daily, and we have our people in the facility to help get it up as quickly as we possibly can. To your main question, which I know is of utmost importance, and we're all, certainly all of us, are very concerned about parents trying to get formula for their infants. I do want to reassure parents and caregivers that the all-of-government work to increase supply means we'll have more than enough product to meet current demand, and FDA is committed to working closely with Abbott so that Sturgis can restart producing safe and quality formula products quickly. Thanks to the collaboration of all of the players in the market, we now for the first time are getting production numbers from them about how much formula each company is producing, including Abbott, which has revved up its other plants and is currently meeting the supply production quotas that they were using before the shutdown. All the other manufacturers have increased their production, and of course we have fly formula in full swing now. So I have good numbers to indicate there will be adequate supply. We had hoped to have a super supply so that we get the shelves completely restocked. The estimate is perhaps 2 weeks, but it's too early to give an exact estimate of what the delay will be in the Sturgis plant.
The FDA Commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee today. The Abbott infant formula plant in Michigan is the largest in the country. Abbott and 3 other companies, Gerber, Perrigo, and Reckitt, produce about 90% of the formula in the United States. U.S. House of Representatives today passing a bill that would allow year-round sale of E15, the higher ethanol fuel blend, in an effort to bring down gasoline prices, blended prices, and also to reduce food costs in this bill. The bill would create a special investigator's office at the USDA to enforce fair practices in meat packing and help farmers adopt precision agriculture technology. The bill, titled the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act. And speaking in favor on the House floor, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat from Texas.
Civilians and soldiers are dying in Ukraine, and the American people are feeling it in their pocket, even as they rise up to support democracy. The American people know there's a problem. But as we stand on the floor today, the good news is that Democrats care. And that is why we rise today to offer the Lower Food and Fuel Costs Act, because the American people see it. They see it at the gas station on their way home or to work. They see it at the grocery store when their carts are half empty. They see it with their hard-earned paychecks that don't meet what they need. And inflation, they know about it. But you know what? They're looking for a fighting team like the Democrats to make something happen, not a whining, complaining, get nothing done. In my community, the interest rates, 8.5% of the cost of goods in Houston, Texas. I'm not going home and not telling them that we're out here working. And so I ask for our colleagues to recognize
The gentlewoman's
the
time has
importance
expired.
of lowering costs at the grocery store, ensuring robust competition, helping farmers. Let us fight to pass this bill. We care. I yield back.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat from Texas, on the House floor. Opposing this bill, Congressman John Rose, Republican from Tennessee.
I want to make it clear, just because Democrats named their bill the Lower Cost of Food and Fuel Act does not mean this bill will achieve that goal. The only thing it really achieves is a campaign talking point for Democrats responding to constituents frustrated with higher prices at the grocery store and gas station caused by their reckless spending. Instead of wasting our valuable time debating this bill that will never become law, we should pass H.R. 8069, the Reducing Farm Input Cost and Barriers to Production Act, introduced by Ranking Member Thompson, which includes real, immediate solutions our farmers, ranchers, and producers support. His bill, which I am proud to support, would reverse the EPA's reckless actions related to crop production tools, reverse the Biden administration's confusing and disastrous changes to the Waters of the United States rule, and would withdraw the SEC's ludicrous ESG rule on climate-related disclosures, an action that has received bipartisan support.
Congressman John Rose, Republican from Tennessee, on the House floor. The House passed the original bill brought up by the Democratic majority. The vote was 221 to 204, mostly party line, but 5 Democrats did vote no, 7 Republicans voted yes. Regarding the renewable fuels part of that original bill, thehill.com adds this: the package's path forward in the Senate is unclear, but the Biden administration has previously found support for ethanol expansion among Republicans who represent ethanol-producing states, including Iowa Senators Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst. Grassley has already co-sponsored the Senate version of another segment of the package to address allegations of anti-competitive behavior in the meat and livestock industries. And a little bit more about the fuel part. The Renewables Fuel Association president says that E15 typically sells for 10 to 40 cents per gallon, less than regular E10 gasoline does today, and that translates to over $300 saved on fuel expenses over the year for a family. Wall Street today, the Dow down 741, NASDAQ dropping 453, S&P down 123. An update from federal health leaders on when COVID-19 vaccines for the youngest children may be available. An FDA advisory panel gave its approval to the vaccines for kids under 5. The vaccines made by Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech. That panel voting on Wednesday, but there's still a couple more steps. Today at a Senate committee hearing, Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, questioning Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director, and Dawn O'Connell, Assistant Health and Human Services Secretary for Preparedness and Response.
Dr. Fauci, for nearly 2 years, I've been asking you when a COVID-19 vaccine for children under age 5 would be ready, and they are now nearly there. While vaccines have been available for older individuals for quite some time, the infant and toddler vaccine has been much slower, leaving many families with young children in a precarious position as they try to keep their kids safe. Do you anticipate that children ages 6 months to 5 years will be able to get their first dose by the end of this month?
Well, again, Senator, thank you for that question, but I do not want to get ahead of the advisory committee. You heard from my opening statement and that of Commissioner Califf that, in fact, the VRPAC, which is the advisory committee to the FDA, made a recommendation, a positive recommendation for an emergency use authorization. The next step would be the CDC, right, in which Dr. Walensky's advisory committee will likely, in fact, likely, I'm sure they will, look at the data and make a recommendation. And then at the end of the day, it will be the director of the CDC's obligation and duty and to make a recommendation. So I hope it does, but we never want to get ahead of the data. The data look very, very good, Senator. I mean, as you heard from Commissioner Califf, the data look really quite good. So I anticipate that that's going to happen, but it would not be appropriate for me to get ahead of my CDC colleagues.
Got it. And just briefly, Dr. Walensky, what does the timeline look like for that review?
are going to review tomorrow and working on Saturday as well, because we understand the urgency of this for American parents and recognize that even on a holiday weekend, we need to be doing this to get it to American parents.
Right, thank you. And Assistant Secretary O'Connell, how will the administration work to educate parents on the safety of this vaccine and help as many families as possible to get their youngest children vaccinated?
Absolutely. So assuming that the decisions come through as we may expect, the approval and recommendation, we have made available 10 million doses for states to order, and the vast majority of them have placed those orders. That will allow us to ship out as soon as an EUA, should it comes, with the expectation that parents can begin getting their children vaccinated next week. So that is our intention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Murray.
Senator Maggie Hassan, Democrat from New Hampshire, questioning Dawn O'Connell, Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, Director of the CDC, and Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, also Chief Medical Advisor at the White House. EUA is Emergency Use Authorization. There are about 23 million children under 5 years old in the United States. And it's the only category, the only age group that it does not have an authorized COVID-19 vaccine. By the way, Dr. Fauci at that hearing at the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing, testifying remotely because he has tested positive for COVID-19. There was also a bit of sparring at this hearing between Democrats and Republicans and the witnesses over President Biden's request for over $20 billion for emergency pandemic spending. And that request is still pending in the Senate. Enough Republicans opposed to this point to support a filibuster. You can find the full hearing, we covered it all, at cspan.org, our video library. From CBS News, the Senate overwhelmingly passed a bill on Thursday that enhances benefits for veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, expanding their opportunities to obtain free medical care and presuming that certain illnesses and cancers were linked to their exposure during their military service. The legislation passed 84-14 with strong bipartisan support and will return to the House for a final vote. Reporting from CBS News. The leaders of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee spoke on the Senate floor before the vote. The chair is Democrat John Tester of Montana.
The days of ignoring the wounds from toxic exposure, wounds not seen until years after those days are gone, conditions like hypertension and MGUS found in veterans like Robert Hunter, a proud Montanan who served in the Army as an engineering officer during the Vietnam War. Robert was exposed to Agent Orange during his service and contracted MGUS years later. He's one of the 66,000 veterans in Montana that would become eligible for relief underneath this bill. Not to mention every post-9/11 veteran in this country who would automatically receive VA health care. This includes more than 3.5 million post-9/11 combat veterans exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. This bill would also remove the burden of proof for 23 presumptive conditions caused by military toxic exposures, from cancers to lung diseases. And it would codify a more transparent framework to establish future presumptions of service connections to ensure future generations of veterans are treated more fairly. And the last, and probably most importantly, it will allow the VA to make the decisions on toxic exposures instead of an act of Congress. In short, the PACT Act will allow hundreds of thousands of veterans across the country to access the VA care that they have been denied and give them the benefits that they have earned.
Senator John Tester, Democrat from Montana, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, on the Senate floor right before the vote to pass this bill. Also speaking and in support of the bill, the committee's ranking Republican Jerry Moran of Kansas.
This bipartisan legislation is the most comprehensive toxic exposure package the Senate has ever delivered to veterans in our country's history. Generation after generation, Americans, one by one, have answered the call of duty with the promise that we, the United States of America, the citizens of this country, would take care of them and their families after their time in uniform. Yet, generation after generation, veteran after veteran, these service members returned home only to be met with a piecemeal process as they worked to cobble together the care that they earned and the benefits they deserved from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Veterans have spent years fighting bureaucracy to get the care they need. And sadly, there are those who have been fighting up to this point who are no longer living to receive the benefits that this legislation will provide. Chairman Tester, the senator from Montana, and I made a commitment to get to this point today, and I'm proud that we are doing so together in a way, and most importantly, this bill will deliver health care and benefits to thousands of veterans who are ill due to their exposure to burn pits and other toxic exposures. There's no doubt that the cost of taking care of our veterans is high, but the truth is, freedom is not free. We say that. This is evidence that we believe that on the passage of this legislation.
Senator Jerry Moran, Republican from Kansas, ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, on the Senate floor today. Again, the Senate passed the bill 84-14. The 14 no votes were all Republicans. The House still needs to pass this latest version before it can go to President Biden to be signed into law. CQ Roll Call reporter Mark Satter tweeting the bill would offer new health care and tax-free disability benefits as high as $3,332 a month to as many as 3.5 million veterans at a cost the Congressional Budget Office has pegged at $278.5 billion over 10 years. The White House reacting to reports of 2 U.S. veterans who volunteered to fight in Ukraine and now whose families say have gone missing. One is a former U.S. Staff Sergeant Alex Drucke, 39 years old. The other, a former Marine, Andy Wen, 27 years old. There are some who are fearing that the two have been taken prisoner by Russian forces. A question today to the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Is there any change in the White House's involvement in this ongoing attempt to get back to missing Americans in Ukraine, or any coordination with the Ukrainian government trying to do so? And has the president either been in touch with or sought to speak with their families?
So we can't confirm these reports. We don't know where their whereabouts are. We are working very hard to learn more about this, about these Americans who are now missing. Our hearts go out to their families during this difficult time that they're going through. It's worth repeating, and we have said this many times, that it is not the time to go to it's not the time for Americans to go to Ukraine during this time of war. The State Department has put out numerous travel advisories warning Americans not to travel there and urging Americans to leave immediately if you are.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her daily briefing with reporters. Some news from the war in Ukraine. The leaders of France, Germany, and Italy all traveling to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv to meet with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and the three reportedly expressing support for granting Ukraine candidate status to join the European Union. Also in Brussels, Belgium, NATO defense ministers meeting for talks focusing on increasing forces and deterrence along the military alliance's eastern borders to dissuade Russia from planning any further aggression. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin among those meeting, and it comes ahead of a NATO summit in Spain at the end of the month. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.